Thank you, Ben. So we began with extremism. We've ended with extremism. Well, actually, we haven't quite ended because there's another example of extremism. Debbie.
There is. I'm going to whiz across the pond to Tennessee at the House Health Committee. This is Bill 1894. Now, if a food source has a human pharmaceutical product.
Right. Debbie, sorry, Debbie, you dropped out there. Just say that again. Just start off with if a food source.
Right. If a food source has a human vaccine in it, it should be deemed a pharmaceutical product because of the dangers of underdosage and overdosage. Now, I know that sounds crazy. We're talking about human vaccines in food. However, Bill 1894, which was being put forward by Scott Sepicki in Tennessee, was proposing exactly that, to classify any food that contains a vaccine as a drug. Does that sound completely ridiculous? Possibly, but let's listen.
The basic premise of the bill is if a food source has a human vaccine in it, we would deem that a pharmaceutical in Tennessee to make sure that we don't overdose or underdose that food source and then compromise the efficacy of the drug.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chairman Clemens, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you give me an example of a food that's a vaccine?
You recognize.
Yes, sir. University of California, Riverside has already perfected the ability to put human vaccines into our lettuce right now. Also tomatoes has the ability to do that also for UC Berkeley. And then Big Tobacco, RJ Reynolds and stuff has perfected the ability to put a human vaccine into tobacco products.
Chairman Clemens.
And is that even legal to do in the state of Tennessee, to sell those with a vaccine in them?
You recognize.
Well, I'm not arguing that point. What I'm saying is there is no law deeming those that when you go into a grocery store, you should know as a consumer, this head of lettuce is a head of lettuce. The head of lettuce right next to it could contain a vaccine in it. All we're saying is if it does have the vaccine in it, make sure it's listed as a pharmaceutical so people can get the proper dosage.
You recognize.
Thank you. Well, my question is right now, can you walk into a grocery store and there be a head of lettuce for sale that has a vaccine in it? I don't think that's allowed under state law presently. And if it is, and you have to list it as a pharmaceutical, are we going to then have Walgreens pharmacists with a refrigerated section? I mean, how's this going to play out?
You recognize.
Thank you. This is more of a consumer protection bill right here, is to make sure that if you're going in to buy tomatoes and there's a polio vaccine in there, that you are aware of what you're buying has a polio vaccine. The problem you have is if it's not treated as a pharmaceutical, being the size and difference between you and me, how many tomatoes do I have to eat to get the proper dosage versus how many tomatoes that you have to eat? And if you eat too many, do you get a overdose?
So, Debbie, at first glance, this might seem like a completely ridiculous assertion or suggestion, but we're already being softened up for it. So, aside from the mass medication of fluoride in water supply, if you remember, a couple of years ago, the UK government announced the mass medication of the entire population that eats bread because they've started putting folic acid in bread because folic acid has an impact on pregnant women. So in order to, instead of taking a supplement, they just eat bread. This is something that we've already accepted as a population, folic acid in bread. And so it's not a massive step to see that they were already preparing us for this type of thing coming down the road.
Yeah, and that's the terrifying thing, I think, really, in that it's normalizing this, that, you know, fluoride, for example, keep tuned, because next week we're doing a brilliant interview exactly about fluoride, and we're medicalizing the water. It's a medication. Nobody's consenting to any of this in bread. You don't know how much is in bread or how much is in water. So keep tuned for this. But sadly, yeah, it's a reality.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, we've got to end it there for today. So I'm going to say thank you very much to Debbie and Ben for joining me today. Thank you all for joining live. If you haven't seen it live, do join us next week for more live UK column news. But we hope everybody has a great weekend. Stay tuned if you're UK column members for some extra. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.